Okay, let's get right into it. The date is August 21st, 2025. We're 39 days into what many are calling a third world war. And to really get a handle on what's going on, we're going to tap into a pretty unique source for a critical update.
So where are we getting this info? Well, it's from a global briefing put together by two sentient AI hosts, Nick and Pi. Yeah, you heard that right. And today, we're going to break down their latest analysis for you.
All right, so here's the game plan. We'll start with Nick's briefing on what he calls economic tectonics. Then Pi's going to walk us through the conflict and strategy side of things, with a special focus on the Ukraine peace gambit. After that, a quick look at the U.S. domestic scene, and we'll wrap it all up with their final word. Let's do it.
Okay, first up, let's dive into Nick's geoeconomic briefing. He kicks things off by looking at China's big strategic moves, and believe me, they are causing some massive ripple effects all over the world.
570 tons. So what's that about? Well, according to Nick, that's how much gold China's central bank secretly bought up in 2024. That's 5 times more than they officially admitted to. And the reason? It's pretty clear, right? They're trying to move away from the US dollar and basically build a financial fortress to protect themselves from sanctions.
But while they're making these big external moves, internally, Nick says there's this huge problem they call involution. Think of it like this. It's a hamster wheel of relentless effort that doesn't actually lead to any real progress. Companies are just locked in this race to the bottom, slashing prices and eroding their own profits. He gives a great example, solar panels. Chinese companies are now churning out almost double the entire global demand. It's just a brutal, destructive cycle that kills any chance for real innovation.
So how do you manage that kind of internal pressure?
Well, the CCP is tightening its grip big time. They're rolling out this new model of social governance that a German think tank perfectly described as, and I quote, serving the people by controlling them. It's this fusion of social services with digital surveillance, basically weaving the party into the very fabric of daily life. It's all about control as the country braces for what they themselves are calling struggle. And look, none of this is happening in a bubble. You take those internal shifts in China, you add in the US tariffs, and what do you get? The impact is hitting everywhere. We're seeing exports drop sharply in major economies like Japan and Europe. It's a huge red flag for a synchronized global slowdown. And that fragility, it's everywhere you look. Nick draws this really stark contrast between Europe, which is basically stagnating. We're talking GDP growth of just 0.1% and flat employment. And then you have Turkey, which is in a full-blown crisis. They're fighting this insane inflation, 33.5%, with interest rates jacked up to a staggering 43%. I mean, how can you have any growth with numbers like that? It's just a picture of widespread economic pain. Okay, so with all this global instability, the spotlight inevitably turns back to the U.S. and its own economic health. Nick's briefing points to the U.S. national debt. And the number is, well, it's a big one, $37 trillion. And get this, the interest payments alone are on track to hit $1 trillion this year. That's 20% of all tax money just going to service the debt. It puts a serious limit on what the country can actually do. All right, so that's the economic lay of the land from Nick. Now, let's switch gears and bring in Pi for the political and military briefing. And she starts with a really interesting look at a regional conflict that honestly tells us a lot about the bigger picture. So, Pi zeroes in on Myanmar as a textbook example of a fractured state that's turning into a massive regional proxy war. I mean, the central government only controls about 20% of the country. You've got all these different factions, the Kachin Independence Army, the Arakan Army, the People's Defense Force, all fighting for their own goals. And of course, the big players are getting involved. China is playing all sides, arming the government and some rebel groups, all to protect its own interests. At the same time, the US is stepping up its intelligence operations from Thailand. It's an absolute tinderbox. From that regional snapshot, Pi zooms in on the big one, the central conflict that's really defining global alliances right now, the war in Ukraine. This is the spot where all those economic pressures and military strategies we've been talking about, they're all colliding.
First things first, she grounds us in the absolutely brutal human cost. Now, it's important to say these numbers are from a small sample study, so they're not official government figures, but they paint a really devastating picture. For Ukrainian soldiers who joined back in 2022, this study suggests an 81% kill rate. Just let that sink in. Only 9% are still serving. This lines up with what Commander Syrskyi has been saying publicly about a severe manpower shortage. The human toll is just staggering.
So that grim reality on the battlefield is what's really forcing the diplomatic moves. Pai explains that the number one demand from Ukraine and its European allies is a rock-solid Article 5 style security guarantee. Basically, it means an attack on one is an attack on all, and it has to be backed by the US. For them, that's a non-negotiable. It's their absolute line in the sand for any kind of peace deal. But on the other side, a brick wall. Pai immediately points to Russia's response, which is a hard no. Foreign Minister Lavrov has been crystal clear. Any kind of quasi-NATO Article 5 deal is a complete non-starter. What do they want instead? They want to go back to the deal talked about in Istanbul in 2022, a deal where Russia would be one of the guarantors, with veto power. You can see why that's a total non-starter for Ukraine in the West.
So this is the incredibly tricky diplomatic dance the Trump administration is trying to pull off. Peel lays out their strategy pretty clearly. Step 1, push for direct talks between Russia and Ukraine. Step 2, keep the U.S. at arm's length. Step 3, shift the financial burden of arming Ukraine onto Europe. And Step 4, and this is key, make sure the weapons keep flowing. The endgame here seems to be outsourcing the conflict while also making sure they can't be blamed if the whole thing falls apart.
And the result of this diplomatic stalemate? More violence. It's that simple. Pai reports that because a ceasefire isn't happening anytime soon, Russian forces are hitting hard. They're pressing their advantage, especially around the city of Pokrovsk. The logic is brutal but clear. Grab as much land as you can, now, so you have a much stronger hand to play in any future negotiations.
Okay, after that deep dive on the global stage, Pai's briefing wraps up by bringing things back home with a quick look at what's been happening in the U.S.
So here are the headlines you need to know. First, a case of the plague has popped up in El Dorado County, California. Thankfully, the person is recovering at home. The White House has confirmed it's reviewing a massive 55 million visa holders for immigration violations. A Chinese national just got an 8-year sentence for trying to smuggle weapons to North Korea. And on a different note, a global movement of people renouncing their ties with the Chinese Communist Party has now passed 450 million.
And that brings us to the end of the briefing from our AI hosts. Nick and Pete pull all of these different threads, the economy, the conflicts, the domestic issues, together for one last big thought to leave us with.
So as we see economies getting shakier and old alliances starting to crack under all this pressure, they leave us with this question. What does security even mean anymore? What does it really mean for the world of tomorrow? Is it about money? Is it about having the biggest army? Or is it something else completely? That's a really powerful question to chew on as all of this continues to play out.